Hello and welcome to the Curious Minds podcast. I hope your mind is feeling extra curious today because I think I'm going to go in some pretty great depths on some things. But first, let me just give you an update of where we stand. It is August 19th as it stands right now. This will probably be released on the 23rd. August 19th. If you are a student, you probably recognize that date as the day that the fall semester at the University of New Mexico begins. Which means students are now moved into their dorms. They are heading across campus to and fro and everywhere, and I got to meet several of them today. Some great people who had some admirable courage to step forward and say, hey, pray for me. Just beautiful. It's the way to get the semester started and build it on prayer, build it on this dependence for God. And so many of them, of course, embarking on new journeys here, which always feels strange. I'm kind of embarking on a new journey myself. And it does. It feels strange. You step out of comfort zones and you just trust that it's going to be worth it. And when you put that trust in God through it, He has a way of really comforting you in your anxiety and motivating you. Embrace it. Don't be afraid. Respect it, but also embrace it. Be thankful for where you're at the time, even if it feels like a trial. I certainly get to see enough trials around here, and I think I'm going to see a lot more because I'm just going to be meeting with a lot of dynamic and diverse personalities. I had an interesting line of questioning the other day. Somebody who I assumed was an atheist, but he started questioning me about why I'm a Christian, why I think God is real. And so I went toward the beginning of the universe, something that seems to be pretty agreeable. Scarcely anybody believes that the universe has just always been here, or that it's eternally old. So, with him, someone I assumed to be maybe science-minded, I said, I believe in God because that's the only reasonable cause for the start of the universe. And he said, well, we don't know how the universe began. Science can't really investigate that question. I said, all right, good. So you must be open to the idea that it's God who started the universe, right? Because if we don't know what the beginning of the universe is, why say it could not have been God? That seems to be the atheistic conclusion a lot of times. And again, this guy wasn't necessarily an atheist. A lot of times you suggest to an atheist that God is the best explanation for the beginning of the universe, or you say God is the cause of the universe, and he'll say what? No. We don't know what caused the beginning of the universe. Well, we don't know is not a refutation of God is the cause. Does that make sense? We don't know means it could have been God, but you can't say that for certain. All right, then don't be an atheist. Don't say it was not God if you're also going to say we don't know. Because if you're going to say it's not God, you're going to have to say we don't know completely, but there are some things we know, and we know that it could not have been God. That's an argument that I haven't heard yet. Why it could not possibly have been God. How would God fail as a sufficient mechanism to create a universe? How would God, especially as defined in the Judeo-Christian tradition, how would such a God fail as the explanation of the universe? I haven't really heard an explanation. Usually it's just complaints like, that's a conversation stopper. That's a science stopper. Or that's shortcutting the issue. That's non-thinking at work. No, that's not non-thinking. It's just due to thinking, we know that no other explanation could be a sufficient cause. All right, so I try to pry this guy open at least to the possibility that God is the beginner of the universe. If you don't know, that means you're open to the possibility that it could be God, unless you've blatantly disproved that. And the cosmological argument says anything that begins to exist needs a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe needs a cause. Seems non-debatable to me. If there's a picture on the wall yesterday and today it's not on the wall, there was a cause to that picture going from being on the wall to not being on the wall. Whether it's the nail breaking, whether it's an earthquake, or whether somebody just took the picture down, whether it's horseplay, some kind of sufficient cause moved the picture from the wall to the ground. Now, if I walk into the Christian Student Center here, and I see something like a ping pong ball on the ground, it doesn't take much of a cause for that ping pong ball to go from the ping pong table to the ground. On the other hand, if I come over to the Christian Student Center and I see it burned to the ground, bulldozed and leveled, I would have a different line of thinking. Alright, it probably wasn't a breeze from the air conditioner. It probably wasn't someone bumping a table that caused this building to flatten. It took a sufficient kind of force to do this. So here's something I said to this guy in this meeting, was that God is the necessary cause to the existence of the universe because the universe is contingent in all three of its parts, being time, space, and matter. Those are the three fundamental elements that make up the universe: time, space, and matter. Can't have an infinite regress of time, therefore the cause needs to be timeless, a la eternal. Space is limited by dimensions, so you need something that's not limited by dimensions or existent in space. Third, the universe is material. Material is subject to decay and wearing down, and a certain amount of energy that's always decreasing in its usable form, although the level of energy is always staying the same. Energy within a closed system is not created or destroyed. So the energy must be something that's not subject to decay, but infinite in power and not bound by space and time. Okay, so there you go. You need something that's timeless, spaceless, immaterial, and powerful. Oh, and by the way, lest you think it's just some quantum force, you need something with an intention to create, because it was created at a certain point. If it's something unintentional, its cause would be eternal and never present, which means that universes would be being generated in infinite points across infinite time. So there's one universe. Its cause is not of infinite ages ago, because we're at the point now. Finite time has been traversed. So there was a will in this creator to make this. So I present some of these ideas to this gentleman, which leads us to the conclusion that the cause of the universe was something timeless, spaceless, immaterial, and possessing lots of power and a will, a mind. And he said, that's great. You have those attributes you want to give to God, but come on, where's your evidence for those attributes? I thought that's a strange objection, because I just gave you the evidence for those attributes. It's the only type of being possible that can create the cause that we have in this universe. So we kind of went in circles for a minute, from how do you know God's the cause of the universe, to stating why that type of God is the cause for a universe, to then removing that idea of God and saying, you can't just plug in that idea of God, you have to have evidence for those attributes. So he wanted some kind of evidence that was independent of the argument I was actually giving. It was kind of an odd tactic. And one of the things he went to, which was, I guess, not surprising, he was just kind of grasping at some of the classic atheist arguments. And in fact, one of the websites I brought up, atheismandthecity.com, has this. He says on the site, I have many objections to the cosmological argument. First, there is, of course, the infinite regress dilemma. If God created the universe, then who created God? And if someone created God, who created the being that created God? And so on and so forth. You get an infinite regress of creators that theists and atheists acknowledge to be logically incoherent, and on and on. And he winds up admitting, yeah, okay, this isn't really the type of God that Christians say exists. And same with this guy in the meeting. He said, that's neat. Even if you want to give me that God is the cause of the universe, if everything needs a cause, then what caused God? Which ends up being a totally incoherent question. So when he brought that up, my mind went the same way. Okay, this is completely incoherent. But I remembered I actually left out the statement that would make that incoherent. And that statement is, God by definition is a necessary being. He's by definition the first cause. We're not looking to traverse back an infinite sequence of causes and effects. And by the way, little tangent here, but it's somewhat relevant. In these conversations with LDS missionaries, I think the starkest disagreement that we've had is the nature of God the Father. God the Father himself, this God of the universe, or God of this world at least, began to exist a finite amount of time ago and existed as a man and still exists as a man. This cosmological argument does not work whatsoever in LDS theology. They believe that God is material, in space, non-eternal, that he began to exist a finite time ago. This argument would not hold water with any atheist that pressed him on the proof of the existence of such a God. It's a huge difference. Even though a lot of the later theology and biblical theology starts to harmonize a little more between Christianity and Mormonism, the fundamental idea of God as a being in his total nature is so far different in LDS theology and in genuine Christian theology. So, that's the tangent. Back to this point about the infinite regress. Infinite regress definitely applies to God as he is viewed in Mormonism. It does not apply to a Christian conception of God. God is the first cause. He's a necessary being, meaning it's impossible that he not exist. He exists from eternity. If anything exists contingently, meaning it's dependent on something else for its existence, if anything exists in that way, then something must exist necessarily. Because you cannot go back through an infinite number of cause and effect relationships. You'll end up never coming to the point now, because you'd have to traverse an infinite number of things, which is, by definition, impossible. So, prior to creation, does God traverse an infinite number of things? No, because it's not that God is from an infinite time ago, it's that he's eternal, or timeless. So he doesn't traverse an infinite number of things to get to the point where he finally decides to create something. That's not the view of God we're talking about. Now, it is hard to explain the nature of what it's like for God to exist before creation, because before is the only term that we can really think in, but it's not really a sufficient explanation for God's existence apart from creation. Alright, that's kind of heavy, isn't it? Let me move on to another objection to this cosmological argument. So what we don't have a God that was caused by something else. We have a God that exists necessarily, created intentionally, is timeless, spaceless, immaterial, but can bring time, space, matter into existence. Because of the capability of not being bound by those things, he has power and authority over them, can bring them into existence. I don't know how all that works, but it does make sense. Okay, moving on. atheisminthecity.com. Oh no, say it ain't so, Dr. Lawrence Krauss. Ugh. He's one of these guys who's a science mind, but certainly not a philosopher. Lawrence Krauss says a flat universe is the only one where the gravitational energy of every object is, on average, precisely equal to zero. It's only such a universe that could come from nothing. Krauss is desperately trying to grasp at a possibility of something coming from nothing. So what is his tactic? Let's redefine nothing to mean something, where the energy is equal to zero. We've got positive and negative energy, so it all equals zero. Some kind of grand karma or grand yin and yang of universal matter. What's the problem with that? Well, an equal supply of positive and negative energy is not the same as zero, because you still have energy that comes from somewhere. You still have material. You can't have anti-material. For every marker that exists on my desk right here, there's not an anti-marker that basically negates its existence. So I don't buy into this idea of equal amount of positive and negative energy. What is negative energy? And again, like I talked about in the critical thinking series, how livable is this? Anything that happens to you is just fine, because it's all just part of this balance of positive and negative energy. Don't complain, because at least the universe is remaining in balance. So what if you're the victim of it? Krauss says something else in this article. Well, I guess he's summarized later in this article. According to Dr. Krauss, we're learning that nothing, that's in quotes, has properties that we once thought impossible. Empty space in a vacuum is never really empty space. Well, doggone it, you just redefined nothing to be something. Does it take a brilliant philosopher like Dr. William Lane Craig to show that he's being contradictory in his definitions here? Come on, Krauss. Take some rudimentary logic. Law of identity, A equals A. Law of non-contradiction, A can't be non-A. Law of excluded middle, either A or non-A. Fundamental laws of logic. And yet he says, nothing actually has a lot of potential to it. Nothing is space with energy and properties. Krauss, we're talking about nothing. We're not talking about space as we understand it. We're not talking about this constant energy fluctuation within material atoms with this spontaneous energy moving about in it. We're talking about nothing where no atoms exist. If you're going to use the term nothing, or if you're going to use Dr. Krauss, let's hold him to the laws of logic here. If we're talking about nothing, actually use the meaning of the term nothing. All right? If you're talking about the properties of what appear to be blank space to our eyes, use that term. But don't try to negate the cosmological argument by appealing to some violation of a fundamental law of logic. All right, let me bring up another article here, talking about the cosmological argument, what I believe is a basically airtight argument for the existence of God. Now, it's not proof of the truth of Christianity per se, but it's certainly not contradictory, and it certainly points in favor of a worldview like that. BigThink.com. It says, out of this vast profusion of planets, it's entirely reasonable to expect that a rare few would have everything right. The right distance from their parent star, the right material composition, right amount of liquid water, and all other factors necessary for life to arise and thrive. We are the lucky ones. Why? Because we wouldn't be here if we weren't. Thus, the well-suitedness of our planet compared to all other planets that aren't isn't an argument for theism, but a potent argument for atheism. The universe we live in is what we'd expect a godless universe to look like. Or, to put it another way, this hypothesis has superior explanatory power. Atheism predicts a universe, just like the one we see. Excuse me, did he just say that atheism predicts a universe? How would that work? Atheism can't predict a universe. We're talking about the idea of how a universe began to exist, not what that universe ought to look like. So the very existence of this universe, as I've been saying, does not project back to some kind of atheistic mindset. Atheism could only predict that natural causes would continue to happen from natural beginning points. And what is the natural beginning point of a universe that is not existent? Continuation of non-existence. There's no naturalistic sufficient force that could possibly be present in non-existence. You might say, oh, but a quantum fluctuation can spontaneously happen and cause some colliding that takes place and separates positive and negative energy. But as I said, there's not negative energy. If something is moving, it has energy. Something moving less has less energy, and something stopped has zero energy. There's not an anti-energy about it. Furthermore, there's no quantum fluctuations unless there's already laws of physics present. Laws of physics aren't going to be present unless there's already matter present, regardless of how small that matter is. And if matter is eternally present, it would have worn down to a point where it's completely unusable. Or, if matter has always been present, and matter is bound to create universes, universes would be created ad infinitum, at every possible point, at every possible time. Certainly not what we see. Here's the Curious Atheist blog. How to get in touch with him, Curious Minds and the Curious Atheist. He goes on to say, as I've said before, and I'll say it again, I don't understand how the Big Bang happened. All I know is what I've read about it from Stephen Hawking. Even if I didn't know what would absolutely satisfy my desire to understand the answers to this big question, I do know that God did it, in quotes, does not satisfy. And I don't think that it ever will. Well, a powerful personal force seems to be a pretty decent explanation for why a painting may not be on the wall, as it was yesterday, or why a ping pong ball is on the ground when it was not yesterday. It's not a question stopper as he's assuming here. I don't know why he considers it unsatisfying. He's looking for a scientific answer to something that's not a scientific question. Now to summarize, the cosmological argument has two premises and a conclusion. Everything that begins to exist needs a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe needs a cause. What's a sufficient cause of the universe? Well, if the universe is made up of time, space, and matter, then the cause cannot be the same thing as the result. The cause must be timeless, spaceless, and immaterial. Furthermore, this being must have an intention, a will, ability, so it must be powerful and personal in order to create something at a specified point with a specified purpose. A cause with intention, because the result also has intention. It's in line with the idea of the Christian God. It doesn't prove the Christian God, but it's very much in line, and it does completely contradict atheism. And I think the arguments from atheism usually do not honor correctly the premises as they're stated. Anything that begins to exist needs a cause. Lawrence Krauss says, no, there's things that can begin to exist without a cause because that's the nature of nothingness. Well, he's contradicting terms. He is not following fundamental laws of logic like the law of identity. And others that say, well, that means that you need to explain the beginning of God. They don't understand the difference between contingency and necessity. Everything that has at a point not existed is a contingent thing. And any contingent thing is dependent on something else for its existence, and you can't have an infinite sequence of contingent things because you'd never come to the point now. Therefore, there's a necessary being that exists. This necessary being needs no explanation for its existence because the being is necessary. Impossible that this being not exist. To quote Thomas Aquinas, this is what we call God. Anything else is not going to provide the result at a specified point in time and would violate either an infinite regress or it would not be capable of producing a result. God is the best explanation for the beginning of the universe. I'm Evan Van Sickle, here at the Christian Student Center for Curious Minds. We'll talk to you soon. God bless and guide you.